Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Climate and the City, a series of conversations with Chicago activists about some of the ways that they can help our city think about and respond to the global climate crisis. My name is Chris Scrable. I'm the Director of Chicago Studies and Experiential Learning in the College at the University of Chicago. We're so grateful that you could join us this evening. And as we learn about the importance of communicating inclusive solutions with the Center for Neighborhood Technology's Leslé Honoré. We look forward to seeing you again as we explore more big ideas with still other partners from around the city in weeks to come. But before we get there, a word about us and about our partners on this event. For those of you who are new to Chicago Studies, we're here to help the college form genuine bonds with Chicago's diverse communities. We offer classes, programs, and resources that support you being more than a visitor when you're here, and that enable you to have a positive impact on your new home. Our partner for this series, and in many of our other offerings, is the university's program on the global environment, which is home to the Environmental and Urban Studies major and minor. You can visit us both at 1155 East 60th Street on the first floor. In addition to Climate in the City, we're excited that PGE faculty are again collaborating with Chicago Studies to offer the Calumet Quarter this spring, an immersive three-course exploration of the history, ecology, culture, and policy concerns of that unique and historic region. In addition to 3 amazing classes, participants will get to spend their Fridays in Southeast Chicago and Northwest Indiana, meeting with community leaders, exploring wilderness areas and deindustrialized zones, and doing field work under the guidance of 3 amazing instructors. We're especially grateful for the support of the Field Museum's Keller Science Action Center as part of that curricular experience, and we also look forward to welcoming them in week 4 of this series. We're currently accepting applications for the Calumet Quarter. You can visit our classes page on our website to learn more. I also wanted to mention a great session that we're offering tomorrow afternoon from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m., again on Zoom. We're really excited to welcome back Stacy Williams, now the Director of Special Collections at Chicago Public Libraries, but before that, part of the team at the Reg, and also Joanna Russ, who's a senior archivist with Chicago Public Libraries. They're going to be walking us through the absolutely immense resources that Chicago Public Libraries make available to the public. Having been in a similar session with Johanna not too long ago, I promise you there are a lifetime's worth of great BA theses and Chicago-focused research papers that are out there in those collections. And I hope that you'll take some time out of your midday to learn how you can learn from them as well. More information and a link to register for that session can also be found on our events page. But none of that is why you're here tonight. So let me hand things over to Tess Conway, the programming coordinator for both Chicago Studies and the program on the global environment, to introduce tonight's speaker. Tess?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Leslé Honoré. Leslé is an author, activist, and poet. She is currently completing a children's book inspired by her viral poem, Brown Girl, that will be released this coming fall. She is also the author of Fist and Fire, a book of poems that inspire action and ignite passion. Leslé joined the Center for Neighborhood Technology in April of 2021 as its Managing Director of Strategy and Communications. Prior to working with CNT, Leslé served as Executive Director of SEIU's Helen Miller Member Education and Training Center, where she and her team trained and supported home care and child care workers in Illinois. Throughout her career, Leslé has weaved her artistic work within her community leadership. She has over 20 years of experience with community-based organizations in the Chicagoland area with a commitment to social justice, advocacy, and the arts. As part of Elevated Chicago Steering Committee, Leslé has infused her poetry, art, expertise, and youth engagement and leadership style into governance and programming. She convenes the Green Line South Community Table of Elevated, which brings together residents and organizations advancing equitable transit-oriented development in the area. There, she provides direction across community arts and culture programs in support of equitable transit-oriented development. She is also one of the co-creators of the Equitable Development Ambassadors Program, a two-way learning initiative that equips community residents with tools to advocate for equity in their communities and teaches and informs elevated leadership through stories, lived experience, and expertise of people from Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Leslé.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about tonight. So I was telling Tess and Chris earlier, there won't be any slides. This is not one of those formal presentations. We are at the end of our day, and I'm hoping to have a conversation about what I do, how I bring all the hats I wear into my position at CNT, but more than that, how I hope to inspire people who are on this call and people that I know to think about solutions when it comes to our environment in ways that aren't by the book, aren't always what we are taught that they're supposed to look like, and to really communicate authentically and to show up transparently when we work with communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about CNT. I'm going to talk about a little bit about Elevated, and talk a little bit about art and how that kind of all meshes together. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with CNT, Center for Neighborhood Technology is a nonprofit that's been around for about 40 years. We have been doing the work of equity and climate justice long before equity became a common word on everybody's lips. We had a very notable board member at one point in time. President Barack Obama sat on our board, and I like to say that because I think it gives us a little street cred. But our mission at heart is delivering innovative analysis and solutions that support community-based organizations and local governments to create neighborhoods that are equitable, sustainable, and resilient. We do this work in roughly 6 areas: water, sustainable economic development, climate, policy, urban sustainability, transportation, and community development. I am not an urban planner. I do not have a background in data. I have a background in humanities, in English literature, in poetry, in communicating in ways that affect how we feel and not necessarily what we see on paper. And I love working with the geniuses that are in CNT's family, because the work that we do on paper, it may look like just calculators or analysis, but what it really does is bridge those gaps between community and how we get funding for solutions and how we talk about it in different spaces. We do interactive tools like our Green Values Calculator, which compares performance costs and the benefits of green infrastructure to conventional stormwater practices. Our ETLD Social Impact Calculator. And I'm going to say ETOD a lot. For those of you who may not be familiar, ETOD stands for Equitable Transit-Oriented Development. And that term ETOD was first coined by CNT's very own Jackie Grimshaw, who is just the queen dame of equity, has been doing this work forever in Chicago. I feel so lucky to be able to just be in the same space with her and learn from her. Our ETOD Social Impact Calculator discovers the social and economic impacts of affordable housing and development and the benefits of locating it near transit. Specifically in Chicago, what we know is 90% of TOD, so transit-oriented development, has been created in white communities on the north side, which means brown and Black communities that are very much in need of equitable transit. We have not got that same commitment to development around transit. And so our ETOD Social Impact Calculator takes a chance of looking at what happens when we focus transit development equitably around communities. And I'll talk about that a little bit more with my work with Elevated Chicago. Our Housing and Transportation Index, Affordability Index, provides comprehensive view of affordability and the cost of housing, the cost of transportation. So ways that developers, community members, municipalities can plug in numbers and get what it actually looks like on the other end. We do a ton of projects. I feel like I'm still learning about every new project that we do. But some of them that are really impactful here in Chicago, I'll just name 2, our Urban Flooding Baseline Project. We developed a visual map of flooding indicators and urban flooding locations in the Calumet region of Cook County. We pay actual residents to record, to take pictures of what happens when their homes flood. And we know that the majority of urban flooding that happens here in Chicago are in Black and Brown communities. And that creates so much economic strain and health strain in the communities. And so one of the first things that we can do before talking about solutions is proving that it's there. Our Rain Ready initiative helps individuals and businesses and communities to find solutions for the problems that inland flooding causes. And our Ecodistricts project, which we also work with Elevated Chicago on, is on the cutting edge of sustainability solutions that use a district scale to achieve greater impact. They link energy, transportation, water, and land use, and use it in an integrated, efficient resource system to really start to create communities that are resilient, that can have nature-based solutions to our ever, growing problem of climate change. The most important work that I do with CNT and why I was compelled to join is really because of our commitment to authentic community engagement, working in service to community-based organizations, being a bridge builder between those communities and solutions and funding that is often gatekept with people who create in theory and have had very little lived experiences. And one of the partnerships that most reflects that commitment is with Elevated Chicago. Elevated Chicago is a collaborative of roughly 17 organizations focusing on ETOD, equitable transit-oriented development, in about 6 communities with a concentration around the half-mile radius around elevated train stations in 4 e-hubs. One of our e-hubs, which is located just a stone's throw away from the University of Chicago, is our Green Line South community e-hub that I co-chair with Gan Foreman. And it focuses on ETOD around the 55th, Garfield, and 63rd Street station. Really, it is a way of connecting what can be very siloed organizations. We convene twice a month. We talk about what it looks like to come up with plans. We work with CMAP, what it looks like to infuse art, to make our communities look the same way transit looks like downtown. Our communities deserve to have sunflowers and murals, and for it to be walkable and well lit, for people to feel safe. And Elevated does that work through 4 lenses. We use a lens of racial equity, health, climate change, environmental issues, and arts and culture, which is my favorite. CNT is also a founding partner of Elevated Chicago, and I am proud to serve as one of its newly elected co-chairs. So we've gotten all of my official roles out of the way, but who am I beyond CNT and Elevated? I am a biracial Black and Mexican, first generation descendant of enslaved people, single mother of 3, survivor of domestic violence, author, public speaker, poet. I think I'm often in a very liminal space where I am constantly cognizant of becoming and bringing more of myself bravely and authentically into every job and panel and Zoom appearance that I can. And I think that's reflective of the world of climate justice. I think we are also in that liminal space of becoming, of understanding, of acknowledging that a degree doesn't mean you know every solution. We can separate climate justice work we can't separate it without acknowledging how closely it's tied to social justice. Communities that are most highly impacted by climate change are Black and Brown ones, and we know that that's not by chance. For example, freeway constructions that destroy fabrics of Black and Brown neighborhoods, creating lasting damage to the people who live there. Federal funding policies for public transit that favor rail expansions to affluent suburban communities over urban transit service improvements, reinforcing wealth disparities, and land use decisions that focus on polluting truck traffic in communities of color, leading to higher rates of asthma and other health problems. I think about Little Village having the 3rd worst air quality in our state, and that's directly related to the truck traffic and freight that goes right through that community, by schools, by homes, by parks. At the heart of what I'm saying, and I hope we can have a robust conversation about tonight, is that we need people of all backgrounds to think creatively about solutions. It affects all parts of our lives, and people who are in a box of just a specific field can't be the only ones coming up with those solutions. It really is going to require us to reach across and learn and be willing to be flexible, be willing to be told we're wrong, be willing to listen to voices in communication that sometimes doesn't sound like what we are accustomed to, that doesn't sound academic, that doesn't always use the language that we are familiar with. But that is really where we can find real solutions. I'm often aware of being in spaces where I'm the only person of color talking about this type of work. I'm often in spaces where no one has ever had their home flood when it rains. My home, my basement, every time we have a heavy rain here in Chicago, it floods. Every time we have a heavy snow and that snow melts, my basement floods. It is something a lot of people have just normalized and don't really understand why it happens to us and why it doesn't happen to other communities. And we need to create space for more lived experiences to take up space when we start talking about solutions. That is the work that CNT does when it comes to our community engagement. We work with lots of community-based organizations, but we also work with the City of Chicago and lots of different departments to really ensure that we're being advocates for communities, that we're not being extractive. There's data that needs to be collected, but oftentimes, historically, people have gone about it in a way that doesn't honor the people who actually live in those communities. We want that information, we want their time, we want them to sit on panels and workshops and listening sessions and do surveys. And to this day, we still have to fight for municipalities to create a budget to pay people to give those lived experiences because it's valuable. We wouldn't have the data without them. To create spaces where they can speak truth to power, when they can ask questions. I have a question. I know that everybody's getting their streets plowed. So much of the South Side has yet to see one, including my street. So these are some of the conversations that are hard to have. So I hope in my role to be someone who can do that on behalf of people who are not allowed in those spaces. But more than anything, I hope to challenge people to continue to do that in their own spaces. So I'm not sure what everyone's background is here, what areas you work in, what you studied in, but to sometimes be brave enough to let go that concept of ideas that just because we may have studied something, because we have a degree in a certain profession, that we know all the answers, or that we know the best solutions for communities. It takes work to be present, to listen, and to sometimes change our minds about what we thought about something, about a problem when we first started to tackle it. But that's where it's lasting. That's where we honor people. That's where we honor our humanity. That's where we become our best selves and create the best communities that we possibly can. With all the work that I do, one of my favorite things to be able to do is to bring art into spaces. I think art is the thread that connects all of our humanity to each other. Art is how we really are able to feel and reflect. And sometimes when we don't find a way to integrate art into real community change, that's where we miss what resiliency really looks like. That's where we miss what culture really looks like. That's where we miss the essence. And so when we use art in ways that aren't just bookends, but when we really integrate it, I've seen so much powerful change take place. Often with our board meetings with Elevated Chicago, we'll start with poetry, even with our leadership meetings that have commissioners from the city and CEOs. We take a moment to reflect on our humanity. And I think that reminds us to be present when we're thinking about solutions. It reminds us to bring all of ourselves, all of our backgrounds, all of the tons of different jobs we may have done over a lifetime, all of those lessons in how to be active and how to be present, how to advocate. And so when I think about the work that CNT does when we do our eco districts and when we do public art, that's where I feel we have the most radical change. Communities need more than, roads and streets that are maintained. We also need art. We need green space. We need places that people feel that they are respected and worthy. And that's what art does. So I'm going to read a poem because I'm a poet, and it wouldn't be genuine to myself if I didn't integrate this a little bit. And what I hope is that this poem gives us a moment to reflect on how all of these things intersect and how to make our city better. This poem was originally commissioned by Elevated for our 2019 symposium. I've since read it at many different nonprofit convenings with the Obama Foundation. It's one of my favorite poems because it's one of my favorite representations of this city that I have grown to love. I've only been here since 1999. I feel like I am an adopted daughter, but this is home and it will stay home. So this poem is called All Aboard. This city of broad shoulders and bold hearts, this windy city that blows into the sails of your soul, sending you soaring on dreams and hawk wings if you let it. This city of emerald necklaces and Great Lakes, juxtaposing nature and skyscraper, this city brutal and beautiful, this city of 16 shots and cover-ups, this city that waters asphalt with blood, this sanctuary city, this segregated city, this rainbow-colored, rainbow-connected blue lines and blue collar, red lines cutting through redlining legacies, this brown and green, pink and purple. You can travel the world on an elevated train in this city. Mexico and China, Italy and Lithuania, the descendants of slaves, great migrations, native land, Black free man founded, this city with two tales that we love as fiercely as its winters are harsh. Let us dedicate today to this city, to using our voices for those who are silenced, to using our privilege to open doors, build bridges, shatter ceilings, and with outstretched hand, welcome in the denied. Let us do the work that is more than trending words of equity and inclusion. This is heavy, but it is our brother, our sister, our humanity. Let us not be weary as we labor. Let us always remember why we fight, why we carry with us into every space this message of hope. If we can better link this city, if we can irrigate funding and equity into barren lands of food deserts and school closures, if we can dam the tsunamis of gentrification, slow the erosion of immigrant families who built beauty with bare hands only to be outbid and their culture commodified, if we can ensure that a train ride from 95th and the Dan Ryan to the Loop to Evanston only has the backdrop of changing cultures and not the hideous demarcation of disinvestment. If we can be better stewards of this city, then we can be better stewards of the world. Because the train in Chicago is more than transportation to and from school and work, it's a passport to the globe. With open minds, with intention and purpose, let us work broad shoulder to shoulder. Hope may be a thing with wings, but sometimes it glides on elevated tracks. Let us deal hope today, and let us start with this city. So I hope I haven't bored you with tons of conversation about the things that I love, but I hope that we can engage in some real conversation now. I know we've been Zooming all day and it's very hard to turn on your camera and to talk when we've been doing this for 8 hours. But I really would love if some of you turned on your camera, asked me some questions. Hey, that's my guy, Gian. And if we can talk about how heavy this work is and how it really requires us to use all parts of our minds, all parts of our connections. We are no longer living in an area where we have the luxury to think linear about solutions. it really has to look as diverse as this city is. So let's talk. Let's converse. I know you guys get talked to all day. Nobody wants to do that at 6 and 7 o'clock at night, but we can have some conversations.
Leslé, maybe I can kick us off, and as I do so, I want to mention to folks that in addition to the camera and your voice, we've got the chat. If you feel like you want to put a question out, Tess and I will be keeping an eye on that and passing those along. But Leslé, I was really struck as you were talking by how often you mentioned bravery, and it isn't something that I tend to think of as a starting point, but I feel like you made this amazing case for it, and modeled it too. I was really struck as you were self-identifying. I'm also a survivor of domestic abuse, but it's not something that I normally foreground when I'm talking in my academic work or in these kinds of contexts. So kind of a two-parter for you. First, what kind of work have you done to make yourself more brave? And then second, how do you stay in that head and heart space when you're doing work that often kind of tries to crush the individual and the distinctive and the idiosyncratic?
So Chris obviously studied at Oprah's Ask Really Great Questions workshop. Maybe she had a master class at it. Chris took it and excelled. I think I'm 45 and I've lived a really, yes, 40s, solid 40s. I've done a lot of work. I think the place that I learned to be bravest and carry that with me was many years ago in another iteration of myself. I did case management and outreach with Thresholds. So I worked with the community here in Chicago. Thresholds is the oldest nonprofit that works with people with severe and reoccurring mental illnesses. And I worked in the Austin community as well as Melrose Park. And everyone that I was a case manager for had severe and reoccurring mental illnesses all of their life. Often they were people whose family could just no longer be in a role of advocate. I worked in a homeless shelter that Thresholds ran, and a lot of the people on my case there were Vietnam vets who carried a lot of shame around what they went through and did not want help, didn't feel that they were worthy of help. And even carrying my own trauma, what that tenure taught me was how to be really present, and how some of the best healing that you can do is helping other people heal. It's also where I saw just the clear delineation of what the lasting legacy of segregation does to us here in the city of Chicago, and how it's not just segregation of space, but of resources to the people who most need it. And it was where every day I was experiencing what that looked like. And often I was the voice for people I was working with, that I was the only person who was going to stand up to a housing manager who wanted to kick them out, or to an employment manager who didn't want to follow ADA regulations and make sure that they had proper accommodations, or fight with Social Security to ensure that they got benefits, or even go through the 18-month, sometimes 2-year process to ensure that they were able to apply for disability. It was really a space that was humbling, but taught me so much about what it meant to be human, and how so many people are not seen as that. When you layer race and class and ableism, and especially mental health, you get this perfect storm of invisibility, of people being ignored, and then all of the other things that happen in the community that we have to learn how to navigate through, re-traumatize over and over again. So when we think about climate change and we think about how it affects all of us here who are in warm homes, who have an ability to get in a car or who have access to transit. My first winter working with Thresholds was that first polar vortex that we had in Chicago. And dealing with people who were without a home and figuring out how to get them resources was beyond humbling, but a reminder of how heavy that impact is for people who don't have resources, and how heavy the responsibility of those who work in fields that do, to always make sure that we are centering that above another narrative. When we talk about ETOD, often we're talking about it with people who want to take transit because of their footprint, of their carbon footprint. They want to bike because it's good for the environment. And we forget that there are people who need access so they can live. If we increase funding, for example, to Metro's electric line and have more trains running, people who live in the South suburbs, many of them are people who were displaced when we tore down projects here in Chicago, would have access to 250,000 more jobs if we increased that rail. So it's simple solutions like that, and that's the work that C&T does, that says, let's look at what the problem is. Let's have real conversations about why that problem exists, and then we can have solutions. It requires us all to be brave, to acknowledge ugly things that we don't want to talk about. So I think, to answer your question, showing up for other people taught me how to show up for myself. And I try to honor that. I'm humbled about spaces that I'm allowed into, and I am always remind myself that I'm there because I'm supposed to be there, and that I'm there to open the door for someone else. So whether it's opening the door physically for someone else, finding a way to mentor, bring someone else in, or if it's opening the door by bringing those issues to the forefront and talking about them when they would, be ignored. When we talk about the field of climate, it is a very white, male, academic field, and it often does not address the people that it really affects. So that was the first part of the question. What was the second, Chris?
The second was what keeps you there, keeps you in that brave space, given exactly what you just said, that frequently is not, you are in rooms where a lot of the rest of the room is very white, very male, very academic, or at least very quantitative.
Very quantitative, yes. What keeps me going is ensuring that it doesn't stay that way. Quite recently, I was on a panel. It was my first panel since the pandemic. It was at McCormick. It was huge. I'm not gonna say who it was for, but it was representing C&T, and it was big. It was a big one. So I was gonna talk about our community engagement, and I go get my lanyard, and you get your lanyard, and it says whether you're a panelist, and then they give you cute little colored flags where you can label yourself with something fun. And I walked into a room that there were no brown people at any level, maybe a sprinkling of women. It was a sea of tan and navy, and I am in a pink and red dress with stilettos and big hair and big ears, big earrings. And someone literally walked up to me and was like, "Hi, can I help you find whatever panel you're going to listen to?" And I was like, "No, I found it." And I was like, "I'm on the panel, so if I can just walk to the front and sit down with the other panelists, I have to present." That happens, more times than I can count. It is something that I no longer am surprised by. So I'm going to continue to show up in those spaces to remind people that your theories may be great, but if you're not working with community that can push back and say, this doesn't work, this is not how it's going to happen. We have 77 distinct neighborhoods in Chicago, and what works in one is not going to work in the other. Who will? I can't leave it up to somebody else who I don't even know exists. So I'm going to show up in those spaces. as uncomfortable as it can be, to just create that conversation and open up some pathways for me not to always be the only one there. It's always fun when I can lock eyes with someone else in the room who's like, oh, I get it, I understand it. When I see friends like Gian and I'm like, oh, I've got my partner here, I know we can do this fight together. You know, where you can text somebody and go, does that sound okay? I still have my imposter syndrome. Like, did I do that all right? Or should I go harder? You know, they're like, unleash it. It's just continue to create those conversations that make people who are accustomed to nice, tight solutions, to graphs that don't show humans, to continue to push them to think beyond what they've accepted is the norm.
Aileen, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, how you got into transit, like how you chose transit or how your organization chose transit as the means that would be most helpful in this area.
So I love talking about that because I lived my whole adult life, and a lot of it may be because I studied English Lit, my minor was in Spanish, and I really thought that that's all I was going to do was to write. And I was a stay-at-home mom for a while, and my husband was emotionally and verbally abusive. And soon I found myself with 3 young kids, having to figure out what I would do with my life beyond what I planned, which led to me working jobs that allowed me to be flexible and still be a parent, which led to me working in nonprofit, which led to me being an advocate. Although we were struggling, I knew the difference between my success and my kids' success was the fact that I had an education, that I had ability to reach out to resources, that I could find programming, and that's what separated me and my neighbors. I've always lived in what I call a proximity to poverty. I could afford the South Side of Chicago. What I wanted to ensure was that other people had that same access that I did, that they were able to thrive as well. And so that's kind of how my career path meandered. But I didn't come to transit until much later. It was actually when I was executive director at the Clio Center, which is just down the street from the University of Chicago. And Elevated Chicago was looking for another steering committee member that was in their radius. I had never heard of, and I've talked to a lot of my friends who are degreed and intelligent and work in tons of fields. I never knew what an urban planner was. I never knew that there was a career created to fix the problems that systemic racism created in communities that a lot of brown and Black people who live that don't even know about. Like, it blew my mind when I started to learn about how our city was created. I knew, you know, what Black codes were, what segregation was, what the Black Belt was, you know, all of that. I knew that from my own education, but I had no idea about the different professional paths that are created to combat that, to learn about that, to develop that. It's a whole world that so many of us who would do great in don't have access to. And it's even those of us who are college educated, we're not even like pushed in that area. It's not even an exposure. So when Elevated came to me, I was like, what do you mean that the red line that I need to take on 69th and the Dan Ryan doesn't get the same attention as the brown line? I just thought that that was happenstance. And I think what happens a lot of times in our communities is we grow up and sometimes we internalize what is not being done in our community and thinking it's like that because that's what we deserve and that's just who we are, and not understanding the intricacies of policy and how things come about. And so that is kind of where that bloomed. So maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And the more I learn about it, the deeper my feet dig in, and it is the place that intersects with all of the things that are so important and valuable to me. Transit changes lives. Having access to transit is how you have access to jobs, education, entertainment, building around transit, developing around transit, so people have the same access to the 20-minute healthy neighborhood that Lincoln Park has south of Madison Avenue is so important. And it's changed my trajectory. And so that Elevated is who introduced me to it. Elevated is how I learned about the work with CNT. Elevated is how I ended up being at CNT. It's where I've met a whole new family of advocates that are near and dear to my heart, and they will never be able to get rid of me. They're stuck with me forever.
And then Guion, if you wanted to go ahead and ask your question.
So I just wanted to push you to expand a little bit. So Leslé, we've had these conversations before. You know, on the north side, transit is looked at as a first choice.
Mm-hmm.
On the south side, it's looked at as an option of last resort.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to go into that a little bit more, just because our perceptions are sometimes different. And I think transit is an easy way to talk about that, because climate has the same kind of thing. So starting with transit and then thinking about climate.
Thank you, Guion. When it comes to transit on the south and west sides of Chicago, where it has been underfunded, where it has not received the same attention to rebuilding, where our elevators don't work, where it's dirty, where it doesn't feel safe, where the walkability from the street to the train is not just, difficult, it's treacherous. If we think about right now, going down Garfield to get to a green line or the red line, we're going through sidewalks where there's tons of vacant lots, which means no one is maintaining the sidewalk, which means people who are of all types of abilities have to walk in the street to safely get from point A to point B, which puts them in proximity to vehicles, which create, crashes, deadly injuries. It's not looked at as anything other than survival yet. The north side can think about the climate change and their green footprint because it's there, it runs, they can use it, everything that they need. You can go to the doctor, you can get your groceries, you can get entertainment, you can get to work, you can get to school, it's all there. On the south side, even if that was your first thought, I want to ride my bike instead of driving my car. Guion, you, if anybody, knows how dangerous that can be in communities that don't have maintained bike lanes. If you need to get to work, if you need to get to school, if the trains aren't running, and specifically running on hours that aren't regular hours of 9 to 5, that are non-traditional work hours, do you have an option of a 2-hour, a train and 2 buses commute, or driving and getting there in less time? The option is not always going to be what's best for the environment. The option is going to be what's best for my family. So until we start having those conversations about what residents specifically need, the option is always going to be one of convenience first, and then, environment second, because when you're fighting to survive, you don't have space for that. There's no space for you to have that conversation. You're just trying to get to your grocery store. If I live just south of Washington Park in Park Manor, there's no grocery store in my community. It's just not there. The first Jewel in 50 years built in Woodlawn recently came about 2 years ago. I drive, I have to. I had 3 kids in 3 different CPS schools. It didn't even occur to me how I was going to maneuver until my transmission went out. And that meant the red line and 2 or 3 buses to get groceries, and having to do that in the reverse, and the amount of time and that was just for one thing. That didn't include me getting to work, my kids getting to 3 different schools. So until we really invest in making sure that communities that need transit, not for just the environment, but to live, we are always going to choose the option that is best for the family And sometimes it's not always a train. It's not always a bus. It's got to be something else, where many of us would love to have that option. It's just not available. And we need to have those conversations about what that looks like. And that's why we do what we do when it comes to ETOD, when we talk about how do we develop our business corridor so that people don't have to go outside of their community to shop, to eat, to thrive. How do we bring businesses in? How do we bring in multi-level housing units? How do we bring in single family housing units? How do we do that in communities that have been looked over with that type of investment for decades? I hope that answered your question, Kian.
Elizabeth?
So I'm just curious, you talk a lot about how CNT really advocates for like community-based approaches to planning problems. And you kind of just touched on this, but like food insecurity is a big problem among Black and Brown communities on the South Side. Obviously, there are less grocery stores, there are less options for healthy foods. Are there any like community-based approaches to food insecurity that CNT advocates for, or that you're like particularly passionate about?
Not directly. We do work with organizations like Iman in Inglewood that have great programs around food insecurities. One of the biggest things that we do when it comes to food is talking about eco districts and how we create nature-based solutions, how we can do raised flatbeds, how we can teach people to garden, how do we use the land for more than just the spaces that are empty and not being used at all. But I think what we do that's really important is when we work with projects that the city is doing and push back on policies that sometimes are created in a vacuum. For instance, CNT is working with the Vision Zero project the Department of Transportation is running. And my job is literally to ensure that when we start having conversations about Inglewood and Washington Park, that we're talking to residents, that data is not created and documented without their being present. And sometimes it can be difficult to convene people and to get people to trust when the city is doing something in their community, when so often they haven't done things in ways that are transparent and build trust. So a lot of times what we're doing is ensuring that partners that we work with are working with integrity, that they're not being extractive, that we are advocating and being those bridges and connectors to those types of solutions.
Just as a follow-up on what you said there about the value of partnership. Sorry if this is a tough question, but the University of Chicago has a reputation of not always being a good partner with the Southside community. So just, what has that dynamic like been in terms of partnering with UChicago on this effort?
Oh, that's a great question, Ryan. So I think what I can say is I've worked with the University of Chicago in many different ways and currently still work with them. Wendy Williams from the Department of Engagement sits on our Green Line South community table. I've worked with her for many years in many different iterations with Cleo, with Elevated Chicago, with CNT. I think the best thing that anyone can do when working with a mammoth like a university is support your peers who speak truth to power, who shine lights in areas that may be underrepresented, areas that are problematic, who push the envelope. And if you're not the person in the forefront to support those people that are, a university is the people as much as it is the institution. So forcing them to listen to the people internally and externally is the best thing that we can do, and to continue to have those conversations. I think sometimes we get exhausted and we stop pushing, and we stop talking about where we know change can happen, because it's heavy, and often we don't see that needle move. we just have to keep chipping away. We have to hand the baton off and rest and let somebody else step forward when we need to step back for a second. But yeah, it's hard to redirect a course of something so big that sometimes has some practices that aren't very healthy and historically have not have been. But to highlight the ones that are, to acknowledge when change is happening and to build upon that, I think is what we can do internally and externally, and to continue to push, you know, to continue to question, to continue to raise concern. The worst thing that we can do is be silent in anything. I mean, I think about the heavy lift that we have as a nation to continually confront our problematic history when it comes to race. There is no easy overnight solution. We have to just keep pushing at it. And it's a horrible legacy. It's a legacy that we don't talk about honestly. And so we have little opportunity to change it if we're not talking about it. So if we look at it like that, the university is just a microcosm of the bigger world that we live in. And we have to constantly fight for change and evolution. Everything is not going to have a good history, but it can have a better future.
And it looks like we have a question in the chat from Hannah. It says, how can young people outside of the policy and planning fields make an impact on transit equity?
Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite questions. So if you go to Elevated Chicago's website, we have a lot of information there, and specific our ambassador program. We just started our second cohort where we work within our e-hubs, and we have people apply. And you get paid a stipend to then learn from community workers, developers, people in policy, how they're doing, what they're doing, reimagine it, create entry paths to just thinking and being educated about how that happens. The other thing you can do is be present. Like, you don't have to be with an organization to go to a zoning meeting, to go to a public hearing, to lift that up. It's your right, it's your money, you can be there. So I think what youth has now that us old people did not have is a wealth of information at your fingertips, on your phone. Your participation does not have to be formalized. It can be grassroots, and that is where I've seen the most change take place. Outside of that, encouraging people who have any desire of it to go into those fields. We need more Black urban planners. We need more brown urban planners. We need more Black and brown people at places that create policy, that talk about it. We need people to be those voices where they are not present. And sometimes it's heavy because you're carrying that load all on your own, but somebody has to do it. So just encouraging us to go into those fields, or exploring, like myself, how you can be a part of it with that not even being your background. I can't do what my team does. I am not gonna make a map. I don't know how to make a toolkit. I can read data because I can read, but beyond that, I have a high respect for what they do. What I do is I take my talents and make it accessible to people who need to benefit from it, but there's so many barriers to accessing that. And so being able to take information in a report and pull out all of the language that if you don't have a master's, you don't know what it means, and use real words that people can have a real conversation about it. That's what I do. I make it digestible. I build that bridge. So there's ways that you can be involved in industry that sometimes isn't, you know, what we think is normative. I would be lost without my intern who helps me with social media. I can come up with an idea to talk about it. I need somebody who can be quick with posting it, or who can tell me, you know, this is going to be more sticky, or these are the hashtags to use. There's so many different parts of the work that we do that requires talent and people outside of the degreed part of it.
And then Susan, if you wanted to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, Leslé, I am a huge fan of your poetry.
Thank you.
Um, and I guess my question is, and you've kind of touched on this in various ways, but I'm really wondering what you found are the best practice ways of facilitating getting community members to really actually be part of the conversation and contribute their input. And I'm thinking both of practical things like people have jobs that interfere with the time when the meeting might be held, or they have children or at home that they don't really have a good babysitter for, or that you mentioned the trust gap. I wonder what you found really helps people get in the conversation just on a practical way, be able to participate, and also to really feel like they're being heard and what they say will matter.
Well, I love you, Susan, first for being a fan of my poetry. Thank you so much. Made my day. And also for allowing me to answer this question. So what I'm going to say is often people don't like to hear, especially people who have us on as partners of a project and we are working in budgets with them. The main thing that you have to do to get community residents to be involved in what your job is and what their lived experience is you pay them. You pay them for their time. You pay them for their knowledge. You pay them to be present. You pay them. If somebody has worked all day and you want to sit down and talk to them so you can get their information and then create a report on it, so then you can use that report to get funding for your organization, what you're expecting them to do is free labor. You pay them. You pay them. And your community engagement team, you will work in the evenings. You will work on the weekends. You will be respectful of their time. The same way I have expectations of people to respect my time is the same way we should respect community's time. Whenever I have somebody ask me, oh, well, what should we pay them? A $25 gift card? I said, they're a consultant. What do you pay your consultant an hour? That's it. Start at $100, $150. You want them to work outside of their job for you, pay them. If you know it's a place where they have kids, you hire somebody to do engagement with those kids so they can be present. You have dinner waiting. If you want somebody to come after work to sit for a listening session so you can gather information for your job, then you better cater it and you better use somebody in the community. Like it's simple, but we've got so far away from those concepts. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with this with universities, with city departments, who expect free labor. And that's a black hole that we don't have time to get into, but it's our nation's history of free labor that expects for people not to have a living wage, that expects for people who are brown and black, and especially women, to work for nothing, because that's what we've been accustomed to. We're accustomed to people doing free labor, not by choice, but because we've made them. And so that's why we have such a big backlash about raising the minimum wage. That's why we have such a big backlash about doing that. And you go, why is this an issue? Why don't you want people to live? It's because our nation has a history of free labor. So if you want community to feel respected, then respect them in the same way you expect to be respected. My time is valuable. If you want me, you pay me. If I want somebody to give me information for my job, I'm going to pay them.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. And what amazes me is it seems really obvious, and yet it doesn't really come up very often.
No, it's obvious. And so the work that we have to do as individuals is to find out what our biases are and how we come to see people. And what you need to do as an organization is do that same work. I am so incredibly proud of CNT for over the past 2 years, really pushing how we define that, making changes to our mission, pushing our board to the point that some people left, because equity is more than just a term. It means you have to put your money where your mouth is. It's not equal, it's equitable. And that makes people uncomfortable. And we're currently doing what is called a conscious ambassador training with a consulting firm, HCAS. And it's 18 hours where we're going down to the basics. Like before you can even start to think about doing racial healing training, we need to go to the basics of how we are, what our past traumas are, how we show up as humans, what our biases are. And then we train to something else. And then we are better informed when we work with communities. But so many of us don't want to get back to that basic work. And we just want to jump past it. And that's why we continue to have these issues. Like our country, we don't want to talk about critical race theory because we don't want to have those difficult conversations that require us to really talk about it and have knowledge about it. There's no healing without naming it. And that goes on every level. In communities, in governances, in universities, there's no change without naming what the problem really is. You can't skirt it because it's just going to continue to come up. So you would think that that's basic. It is not. There are big names that I work with that I'm no longer disappointed. I go into it expecting them to not have budgeted for the time they expect other people to give for their projects.
Leslé, I feel like we would be really inappropriate if after a whole conversation about the importance of people's time and valuing that, we let you just keep on going and kept flying.
I would.
And I want to talk to you all night long, and I think, yeah, I think we all do. So we'll just have to bring you back real soon.
Hey, please and thank you.
To keep this happening. There is a lot of information in the chat. If you weren't following it as we went along, links to lots of things that Leslé brought up, including her own personal website where you can find and procure copies of her creative output. That is available in the chat. Don't forget to grab some of that information before you go. I also would be really off if I didn't mention another great session that we had just a little bit earlier this week with Christina Whitehouse of Bike Lane Uprising. Leslé teed it up so well, talking about the dangers of unmaintained bike lanes. Here's something you can do about it. You can join Bike Lane Uprising's citizen-led, crowdsourced critique of bike lane obstructions, and contribute to their data set whenever you see bike lanes being blocked. And that makes all of our communities just a little bit safer. It will not, unfortunately, help with the not plowing of streets situation that a bunch of us are experiencing right now, but it is at least a wonderful start. If you want to know more about transit-oriented development, you are in luck. The very next session in our series on climate in the city is going to be with the Active Transportation Alliance. It's going to be hosted by another really great lifelong advocate, W. Robert Schultz, who is one of the advocacy directors there. He's going to be talking about the importance of transit, thinking in on transit in particular. Leslé, for my part, I'm just so grateful that we were able to begin a series about something as global as climate with such an incredibly humanizing conversation that really centered the humanity of the people who are impacted, not just by global climate change, but also by very concrete decisions made by their neighbors, by their aldermen and women, by the city in which they live, the region of which they are a part. So thanks for bringing us to that incredibly real and incredibly human place. I hope that we're blessed enough to get to walk with you for many, many miles to come. Thanks everybody for joining.
You are the best. Thank you guys so much for having me and letting me take up some time of your awfully busy days. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who joined us tonight. Have a good night, everyone. Be well. We'll see you next week.